So one of the statements we pose, and again, we're asking people to agree or disagree somewhat or strongly with these statements. So one of the statements is, there is one true God in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Now, thanks be to God, the vast majority of religiously committed Christians are on board with Trinitarian theology. It's like it's in the high 90s.
Love God, love people. It's the AC Podcast. For the love of God, love people.
And welcome to the AC Podcast. My name is Andy Steiger, and today I am joined with my good friend, Andrew Bennett. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Andy. Great to be here.
I guess I say good friend, but I mean, we've been friends for a while now. It's been a couple of years.
Yeah, quite a few years, actually. When was that? When was I here for Apologetics Canada, the big conference?
I want to say like 2018.
That's right, 2018. So,
yeah. You and I met for the first time in Ottawa.
That's right.
I was immediately impressed with the work that you do and was, just thankful for the opportunity to meet you, but also was like, man, one day I'm going to have him out at the conference. And then, over the years, we've been able to do more stuff together, which is great.
Yeah.
Before we get into things, we got some important stuff that we're going to talk about. But before we get into that, I think it'd be important. Maybe you should just introduce yourself first, because it's more like Reverend Doctor.
That's right. Yeah.
How would you introduce yourself?
So, I mean, the Reverend Doctor is kind of the formal title. That's what my mom likes. Would like having him on front of letters and so forth. But no, my name is Andrew Bennett, and I'm a deacon, and I'm a deacon in the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church.
I've always found that interesting.
It's pretty exotic.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Could you just give me the 30-second version of how did you find yourself in are you Ukrainian from background?
No, Scottish and Irish.
Okay, so the mystery just gets deeper.
I know. Well, I always say that the great things that unite the Celts and the Slavs are love of our Lord Jesus Christ and love of root vegetables. Kind of draws us together, the potato, the beet, so forth. But seriously, I mean, I grew up Roman Catholic in Toronto, and a very churchy kid growing up. I was an altar boy. My parents were very involved in our parish in Toronto. And I went off to university. I remained faithful all through university. And then I came back to Canada, having done a PhD at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Came back to Canada, moved to Ottawa, was active in the Cathedral Parish in Ottawa. And then in my late 20s, experienced a bit of a spiritual malaise where I kind of stopped praying. I kept going to church, and it wasn't a loss of faith, but really questioning sort of how do I want to live out my Christian life. There was a girl involved who was Greek Orthodox, and we became really good friends. And I would attend her Greek Orthodox church on Sundays, and then I would go to Mass at my local parish in Ottawa in the evenings. And then over time, I found myself being drawn more and more towards the Eastern tradition, the Byzantine tradition. And I started attending the Ukrainian Greek Catholic parish in Ottawa, St. John the Baptist. And I've been there now for 21 years.
Okay.
And so the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church, to give it its proper name, or sometimes just the Ukrainian Catholic Church, is one of the 23 Eastern churches that are in communion with the Pope of Rome. So within the Catholic Church, there are 24 churches, actually. The largest by far is the Roman Catholic Church, 1-point-something billion people. And then there are all these other Eastern churches that at various times came into communion with the Church of Rome, or actually in some cases never left communion. So our church is about 5.5 million faithful. The largest populations would be in Ukraine, Poland, Russia, where we're now essentially an illegal church. We're being suppressed by the Russians. Also now even in Eastern Ukraine and the Russian-occupied territories of Eastern Ukraine, our church is now officially illegal. Wow. According to the Russians. And in Canada, we've had, our people have been in Canada since the first waves of Ukrainian immigration in the late 19th century. So I'm a deacon, I'm an ordained deacon. And so in our tradition, unlike in the Roman Catholic tradition, where if you're referred to as father, that means you're a priest. In our tradition, once you're ordained to major orders, so to be a deacon, you're called father. Okay. So amongst ourselves, as clergy, I would just be Father Andrew. But when I'm with Protestants and Roman Catholics, I always put in deacon just to not confuse people I'm not a priest.
Gotcha. But you do wear a collar at times.
I do wear a collar. I mean, typically I wear sort of Harry Potter-esque robes.
Yeah.
Like a cassock, an under cassock, then an outer cassock with big flowing sleeves. But I work at at Cardus, and Cardus is broadly ecumenical. So I try to blend in a little bit, and so I'll wear like a Roman collar. But today I'm in my evangelical civvies.
Appreciate that. Making me feel, very comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sure.
You said Cardus, so we should jump into that. Tell us a little bit about Cardus and how you got involved. And maybe to start that, just share a little bit about your journey from working in the government into Cardus.
Yeah, so when I first came back to Canada after doing my graduate studies, moved to Ottawa for a position in the Privy Council office, so the central department of government in Ottawa. And I was in the public service for 15 years. And the last 3.5 of those years, I was appointed as Canada's ambassador for religious freedom, the first and to date only ambassador for religious freedom. And I headed up the Office of Religious Freedom within, at that time, the Department of Foreign Affairs, International Trade and Development, now Global Affairs Canada. And the role of that office and the position was to advance religious freedom as a major plank in our country's foreign policy and our human rights policy. And so I did that for 3.5 years. It was an amazing experience. I was the only Canada-based ambassador. So that meant I was essentially a roving ambassador. So I went to countries where there were significant levels of persecution and frustrations of religious freedom. And I got to experience the persecuted church in very significant ways in many places, met people who suffered persecution, and then also met a lot of people who were willing to stand up and stick their necks out to champion those being persecuted.
Oh, it's been pretty inspiring.
Yeah, very inspiring. And we spoke out on behalf of anyone who faced persecution for their beliefs, including atheists in Saudi Arabia, Tibetan Buddhists in China.
And do you know, this is an important point that a lot of people don't realize is, I would say, is that this religious freedom is at the foundation of a democracy.
Oh, fundamentally.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're hardwired as human persons, as human beings, to seek meaning and to seek the truth.
Yeah.
And so this is why religious freedom is often referred to as the first freedom. So that's certainly the case in the First Amendment in the United States, in the U.S. Constitution. And it's the first of the fundamental freedoms in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. Because we have to remember, too, that freedom of religion, Andy, is not fundamentally about my inner life of faith. I'm always free there.
Right.
So those who are persecuted, including the holy apostles, you read in the book of Acts, when Peter and Paul and others are in prison, they're still free. But religious freedom is fundamentally about the public living out of your faith.
Yeah.
And we need to be free to do that so that we can contribute to the dialogue that takes place in the public square of our country.
See, this is the part that I think is fascinating, how these intersect them with democracy. Is within a democracy, you have to learn to get along with each other, even when you don't agree. And what that looks like when you have a country like Canada that has a multiplicity of religious, beliefs, different worldviews, and how do we get along? How do we respect each other and still hold to our, opinions and beliefs?
Yeah, at the most fundamental level, it's a recognition of our inherent human dignity. That you and I come from different Christian traditions, so you and I are going to disagree on a whole range of theological points, ecclesiology, probably nature of salvation, and what have you. But I recognize in you, first of all, my brother in Christ, but also that you bear his image and likeness.
Right.
And that's the same for our fellow citizens who are Jews, who are Sikhs, who are Muslims, and also who are secular humanists, atheists.
Yeah.
They too bear that image. And of course, as Christians, we understand that image and likeness through the lens of the incarnation. And so we have an absolute duty to champion human dignity in the public square. And that means to have robust debate. Yeah. And I always use the expression, it's the freedom to differ, but not to defer. Mm. So I think for a long time, a lot of us as Christians, probably our generation, the view is often that I need to privatize my faith.
Right.
It's what I do in the comfortable pew, maybe what I do at home, but I'm certainly not going to take it out into the public square, into my workplace, into my university or my school, because I don't want to be accused of proselytizing or what have you.
Right.
But of course, we know that's fundamentally incongruous and incoherent with our Christian walk, that our baptism is not a private matter,
right?
And that we're called to live that out, not just for ourselves as Christians, but, to paraphrase Father Alexander Schmemann, a great, Orthodox theologian of the last century, it's for the life of the world. So we are Christians not just for ourselves, but for all of our fellow citizens. And we need to have in that public square that dialogue where we can engage one another in difference, but also find that radical equality we have as human persons in that the lens of the incarnation, the light of the incarnation.
Man, this could be a whole topic in and of itself that I'm sure you and I would love to talk on, because this is something I even have to talk to Canadians about, though, because you're right. A lot of Canadians that I engage with aren't sure what to do with their religious beliefs, and if those beliefs are just something that they leave at home, or can they take them with them to work and to the public square in general. And one of the things I've been asking, people to think more about lately is, what does it even mean to be a Canadian? Then?
Yes.
Let's think about it like that. And, part of being a Canadian is to be and to have a worldview that you're living out. And that those need to go together. And the fact that we have a country right now where that people aren't sure that they can be both a Canadian and live out their worldview, whatever that might be, is concerning of itself. And that's a discussion that maybe we'll have to circle back on that one for another day. Yeah. But I know that this does tie in with the work you do at Cardus. So could you just give us a quick, view of what Cardus does? And then we're going to jump into a survey that you guys just recently released. Just a few months ago. Yeah,
just a month ago, more or less. Yeah, month and a half. Yeah.
Well, it was done maybe in February, but it was just recently.
Yeah, May 7th we released it.
Great. And so we're going to talk about that. So give us a little bit of background on what Cardus does before we jump into that survey.
Sure. So Cardus is a think tank. And some people think when we say that, they're like, what do you think about? And are you in this kind of hermetically sealed container when you do it? You're in this tank. But really what we are is a group of Christians, roughly 40 of us. We're coming up to our 25th anniversary as a think tank in Canada. We are nonpartisan. We have political views, but we're not affiliated with any political party. And we're Christian. And we are...
Are you a charity?
We are a charity, yes, that's right. So we're a charity, not a not-for-profit, but a charity.
Okay, so you're not a not-for-profit.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and we depend upon the generosity of our donors. And we have, a lot of our donors are just giving very small amounts, each month or annually. And we benefit from their generosity, and we don't take any money from government. We get funding from some charitable foundations, private foundations, institutions.
So not to belabor this, but I'm just curious on this point. So you can't issue tax deductible receipts?
We can.
Oh, you can?
We can, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're a charity under the CRA.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I was getting that confused. I guess I was seeing that synonymous with nonprofit. But
not-for-profits cannot issue charitable receipts because they operate in different ways. They tend to do more direct advocacy, so they're often lobbying government.
Okay.
But a charity is a little bit more restricted in that regard. Yeah. So at Cardus, we're Christians, but we come from a variety of Christian traditions. So we have sort of at the founding of Cardus, it was a group of Reformed Protestants, mainly from the Dutch Calvinist tradition, various strands of that, and Roman Catholics, who are really at the opposite ends of the Christian spectrum in many respects. But they realized that, okay, we're going to disagree on a lot of things theologically, but we have a common understanding of the role of Christians in the public square. And so what we do at Cardus is we look through the lens of 2,000 years of Christian thought to understand what is the nature of our common life together. And we do that through research, through publications, through events, through networking. Our area that we focus on mainly in our research, which is sort of research directed towards public policy direction and recommendations. Work in economics. So there we're looking at the nature of employment, the nature of labor, the nature of money, finances. We have Cardus Health, which is a fairly new program. It's looking right now a lot at euthanasia and the impact of that on our country. We have Cardus Family, which looks at the nature of family and marriage in Canada and really mines a lot of the statistics that come out of StatsCan and trying to understand where are things at marriage and family in Canada, child care as well. Then we have Cardus Education. So Cardus Education is committed to educational pluralism. We want to understand what is there in the broad sort of ecosystem of types of education. And we focus primarily on secondary and primary education. And so for the better part of a decade, we've been running the largest education survey in North America that surveys outcomes. What are the best forms of education? And of course, we control for bias, but we find that time and time again, those surveys indicate, and we're surveying people that have, it's just pure homeschooling all the way through to people that opt for publicly funded secular schools and everything in between. But consistently, we find that the best form of education that produces the best outcomes is faith-based independent schools.
By the way, what's something that's interesting that's happened here is it's very difficult now to get into a faith-based education. Just the need is great, and what I see is it's not just Christians who see that, but I see Christian and non are trying to get into these schools.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think people realize that often what they're getting in the public schools is lacking significantly, and certainly.
I don't want to go down this trail, but there is irony to this, isn't there? There's always irony to me where this has historically been the case.
Yes.
That Christians have created schools and have done a good job at it.
That's right.
But then they become secularized, and then they're terrible, and we have to create new schools.
Yeah.
So I get concerned. I'm like, how long will it stay Christian? And the need for it to stay Christian, which actually speaks a lot to this survey that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, right now, I live in Ontario. I grew up in Ontario. My parents sent me to an independent faith-based school that is now not so faith-based, which is is a source of sadness. The public school, the publicly funded Catholic schools in Ontario are facing significant challenges and have sort of veered off in some unfortunate directions. So there are Christians of a variety of different, churches and denominations that are establishing these new schools. And so at Cardus, we're really supportive of that, and we try to help them with research.
Well, I got to tell you, I love the work that Cardus does. And one of the things that one of the reasons why we wanted to start the show just even by talking about all of this is because you need to know about the great work that Andrew's doing, about the great work that Cardus is doing, and the wealth of information that they have available to you to really be informed of what's going on here in Canada. And speaking of that, so there's a survey we've talked about a couple times here that was just recently released. It's called Still Christian with a question mark, What Canadian Christians Actually Believe. And the findings, when I was reading this, I was struck immediately, and I emailed it out to you right away. I was like, Andrew, we have to, talk about this on the podcast, because I found it both encouraging and discouraging at the same time.
Yeah, it's very much so, and that's the typical reaction I think that people have had to this particular survey and research that we've done. So this report, Still Christian, comes out of the program that I direct, which is Cardus Faith Communities, and so that program incorporates a lot of research, but also trying to engage, particularly with Christian pastors and leaders, to understand what are the challenges they're experiencing, what are the opportunities they see, and trying to support them in that regard. So this particular survey is
You did this with Angus Reid,
that's
we
right.
should say.
That's right. Yeah. So the Angus Reid Institute, we've had a long-standing partnership with them, about 7 years now, since 2017. Oh, wow. Angus Reid is an actual person. He lives here in Vancouver. And Angus is a devout Catholic and really passionate about these types of questions. So since 2017, Cardus and the Angus Reid Institute, ARI, we've partnered to look at the relationship of Canadians with religious faith. And then together with that partnership with Angus Reid, who's our survey partner, they conduct the surveys, we have a new partnership, relatively new, with the Canadian Bible Society. And so this is the second project we've done with them. We did a project last year that looked at Canadians' relationship with the Bible. So we did a similar survey, and then we produced a report called The Bible and Us, which examined how do Canadians read the Bible, where do they read it, why do they read it, how do they read it, when do they read it, what do they think is in the Bible, what are their responses to what's in the Bible? And that was very enlightening as well.
Yeah.
So as to step off of that survey, we decided this year that we would do something that I think, to my knowledge, this is the first time it's been done in Canada. And some of your viewers and listeners will probably be familiar with Ligonier Ministries down in the States, Reformed Ministry, started by R.C. Sproul a number of years ago. And they do a biennial survey called the State of Theology, large sample size, and they pose a series of statements, and they want to find where are American Christians in their faith. And they survey all strands of Christians. And so we thought, let's do a smaller version of that survey here in Canada. And so what this survey asks, or I should say what it poses, is a series of 20 statements. And then we ask the Christians who took the survey to agree or disagree with these statements.
And we should say by Christian, you've broadly divided those into 3 camps.
That's right.
So maybe describe the 3 camps that you broke the Christians into.
Sure. So we divide Christians, actually, I will say 4 camps: Roman Catholics, mainline Protestants, and evangelical Christians. Now, we, for the sake of accuracy, for the sake of having something to compare against our surveys, we use the Statistics Canada definition of these. So mainline Protestants would include Anglican Church of Canada, the United Church of Canada, the Presbyterian Church in Canada, Pentecostal assemblies, Reformed churches, Baptist church, like for the Convention Baptists. And then evangelicals is going to include obviously a broad array of evangelicals, including those who identify as non-denominational.
And this gets a little bit tricky too, though.
Very tricky.
Because even some that would be in camps that you would normally put into mainline Protestant actually see themselves as evangelical.
Oh, sure. So how do you, for example, do you take, people that are members of the Anglican network in Canada? They're Anglicans, but they see themselves typically as evangelicals.
Yeah.
The folks at St. John's, Vancouver, they would certainly see themselves, I think, as evangelical Anglican. And then there's also other Christians. So this would include predominantly Orthodox Christians, so Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox. Orthodox Christians are the fastest growing Christian community in Canada. If you look at the recent
But were
surveys.
they part of this survey, though? Because I didn't see them a part of it.
They are, but we didn't have a significant sample.
Okay.
So we didn't want to, we would need to oversample for those communities.
So that's why you're saying there's 4?
That's right.
Okay, but they just, because the sample is too small, it didn't use that one.
That's right. And we also screened out those communities who themselves might consider themselves Christians, but broadly are not considered Christians by most Christians. So that would include Latter-day Saints and Jehovah's Witnesses. They were screened out from the final results.
Okay.
Now, we've used these categories as far back as 2017 in the first surveys we did with the Angus Reid Institute. So what we ask on this survey, the first thing we ask people is, tick the box. What are you? Okay, I'm a Roman Catholic. Okay, tick the box. I'm an Anglican, mainline Protestant. I'm free evangelical. You tick the box. Now, we're at that stage, we're not asking them, how often do you go to church? Do you read the Bible? This is just tick the box. Mm-hmm. All of these people have some sort of connection of varying degrees to a Christian tradition. But then we want to find out, okay, how strong is that connection? And so since 2017, we've been asking the same set of 7 questions to gauge, okay, just how religiously committed are you? And before, the standard question was, okay, how often do you go to church? But as we know as Christians, that's only one aspect of our faith.
Yeah.
So we ask 7 questions. The first question, do you believe in God or a higher power? And then, do you believe in life after death? Do you have an experience of God in your life? Do you pray regularly? Do you read from a sacred text? Reminding this is surveying all religion. Do you go to church regularly apart from weddings and funerals? Do you attend religious services regularly apart from weddings and funerals? And do you believe that a parent should educate their child in their religious tradition? So if someone answers, yep, to all 7, I'm on board, you're religiously committed. Okay. If someone answers no to all 7, or maybe they say yes to 1, we consider them not religious.
So to give clarity then, what you're doing is you're wanting to separate from the sample those that are committed.
Yes.
Because that's who when we're going to talk now, we're talking about those people.
Yeah, in particular. But we need to also, because let's understand, and this will come out in our conversation, what does commitment mean to different types of Christians? Right? So now when you look at the surveys we've done since 2017, those 2 ends of what we've christened the spectrum of spirituality, I'm not a particular fan of that language, but it's good enough. The religiously committed in Canada are roughly 18% of the population. If you average out all of those surveys we've done. The non-religious, about the same, 18.5%. But then you've got a portion of people who, when asked those 7 questions, they're doing maybe 4 or 5 of those behaviors. So they clearly identify with a Christian tradition, but typically they're probably not reading the Bible and they're probably not going to church regularly. But they still see themselves as connected with a religious tradition. Then you've got those folks that are doing 2 or 3 of those things, and they represent over 40% of the population. So these are the seekers.
Yeah.
These are the people that are, doing a little hatha yoga one week, reading Chicken Soup for the Agnostic Soul the next week, and they've got some sort of connection with the transcendent, but they're not really sure exactly what that looks like necessarily.
We're talking today about the committed ones, those that ticked all the boxes, that they are what we would call, committed Christians. And this is where it kind of gets concerning then, because in the survey, you guys begin to ask them questions about their beliefs.
Yes.
So what do they actually believe as a Christian? And for me, as I was reading this, I was both encouraged and discouraged. Now, I was encouraged because when I saw the evangelicals, they did very well,
yes,
I would say. And I'm curious because I I have to say there's a part of me that was interested in talking with you about this, with your background in Catholicism, going, how did you feel about this? Because they, the Catholics were in the middle, and then you have the mainline Protestants were behind, behind them. And we're talking about some significant issues here. So let's dive into this, because to hit some big ones here, to take the Catholics as an example, there are some major theologies here that the church has really been clear on, such as abortion. And they're more or less in the 50% camp with regards to whether or not their view on that. Another one being their view of Eucharist.
Yeah.
Is it the actual body and blood of Jesus? And again, kind of on the fence, even with regards to their view of Mary.
Sure.
That really surprised me. Where, so just to give some perspective here, often the evangelicals were up in the 80% and higher. Yeah. And a lot of these with the Catholic was somewhere around the 50%.
Yeah, and just to provide some clarity on how we presented the results. So there's the religiously committed. So the religiously committed in the research is made up of all Christians who are religiously committed, who are doing those 7 behaviors, doing those 7 things. But because the numbers are relatively small, because remember, this is 18%, so the total sample size for this survey was just over 2,000. Of those 2,000, about 1,100 were Christians. And so the religiously committed are 18% of those, thereabouts. So because of the small samples, we couldn't break down the religiously committed into religiously committed Catholics, evangelicals, and mainline Protestants. The samples would have been too small. So when we say religiously committed, that's all Christians of all types. And then when we say mainline Protestants, evangelicals, Roman Catholics, that's anyone who ticks the box. So if we take the Roman Catholic results that we present, that includes faithful Roman Catholics, and then Roman Catholics who never go to church, but still tick the box.
Gotcha.
Right.
So that could be skewing this a bit.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Now, what that would tell me then is that in these other denominations, or, with the mainline Protestant and Roman Catholic, that nominalism perhaps is more of an issue there.
That is exactly the issue. And I think what comes out of this survey is a problem with incoherent Christianity. And how are different Christian traditions, how do they view commitment? I think with evangelical Christians, you're either in or you're out. There's no sort of in between. And so I think when you look at the evangelical results, evangelicals look very, very committed and faithful. When you look at the mainline Protestants and the Roman Catholic results, a lot of people there will still identify as being Anglican or Roman Catholic, but they may not be fully on board. Whereas I think if you're an evangelical Christian and you identify as that, you're fully on board.
Now, here's something that's interesting to me about this, though, is within the evangelical tradition, because in this survey, what it was looking at is, okay, is the person that's sitting in the pew holding to the same theology as the pastor?
Correct.
At the front, or the leader, the church and their doctrine, what's being taught, and are they the same? Yeah. Are they holding the same doctrine as what's being taught? And within the evangelicalism, you see that they, by and large, are.
Yes.
To a fairly, I think, pretty high degrees, particularly in some areas, was as high as like 95%.
Yeah.
But here's what I thought is interesting about this, and I'm curious your thoughts on, is evangelicals hold to something where we would say that in theology we have what are called closed-handed issues and open-handed issues. So we tend to have grace on those, what we'd call those issues that are open-handed, where we agree to disagree on.
Right.
Calvinism, Arminian, and
Sure.
in the list goes on. Versus issues that we would say, okay, this is a closed-handed issue. This is an issue that we are in agreement on. So that's where I thought it was interesting to me, is that there's this openness to actually disagree, that you can. I pastored for 20 years, and I never pastored with a church with another pastor that we agreed 100%
Sure.
On everything. But I thought that was interesting that by and large on those major issues, there is agreement with evangelicalism. But it's really shocked me with the Roman Catholics that wasn't the case, given that that's actually part of their theology.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that you hold to what the church is teaching.
Yeah.
Am I making sense? And
You're making perfect sense. I would say with evangelical Christians, there's a very high level of coherency. So they confess what their particular strand of evangelicalism teaches. There's a very high coherence between what is taught and what is actually believed in practice. I would say, unfortunately, we'll just focus on Roman Catholics. There's a lot of incoherence. And these are not, like the questions that we're asking are not kind of fringe topics.
No, these are like issues of like the fundamental issues of like the Trinity, for example.
This is mere Christianity, to use Lewis's language, right?
Yeah, it is.
So one of the questions one of the statements we pose, and again, we're asking people to agree or disagree somewhat or strongly with these statements. So one of the statements is, there is one true God in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Now, thanks be to God, the vast majority of religiously committed Christians are on board with Trinitarian theology. It's in the high 90s. And certainly evangelicals are, and certainly a majority of Catholics are as well, and a majority of mainline Protestants are. But then when you get into other fundamental questions that relate to the nature of who is Jesus Christ. So one of the statements we put forward, I'm paraphrasing here, but Jesus had many roles, including a teacher and a prophet, but he was not God. So this is the Arianism question.
Mm-hmm.
I have had a working assumption for some time that a fairly significant proportion of people in the pews are implicitly Arian, where they see God as being God the Father. And so when they think of God, they think of God the Father. But then there's Jesus. And how is Jesus connected in that way? There's some fuzziness. And so on that particular question, then we had another question on Christ's divinity. A significant proportion of evangelicals were a little unsure, and a very significant proportion of Catholics either did not agree with basically a Nicene Orthodox position, or they were totally confused. And in some cases, the numbers were as high as 20% of Catholics who didn't want to answer or weren't sure. Now, this raises some very significant questions. If you're calling yourself a Catholic, okay, maybe there's some things that you're going to disagree with the church on. But when it comes to questions like the human and divine natures of Christ, the Trinity, that God cannot make a mistake, that he's omniscient, he's omnipotent, and so forth. And if you're fuzzy on that, well, that points to something deficient in your formation. Now, Thomas Cardinal Collins, former Archbishop of Toronto, was on one of the panels that we had when we launched this report. And he made a really interesting point. He said, if you ask the Catholic Archbishop of Toronto, how many Roman Catholics are in the Archdiocese of Toronto, which extends beyond the reaches of the GTA, he'll tell you 2 million, without flinching. And then you ask him, how many of those are going to Mass regularly? He'll tell you 300,000. So that's 1.7 million who are not attending Mass regularly. But they're still seen as being part of the Catholic family. So
Right.
there's this openness to these people, like they're still there, they're still the baptized, but how do we reach them? And I think what this survey is showing us is there's not only a problem of poor catechesis, in many cases, I think these people are not even evangelized. And that's a significant challenge for the Catholic Church today.
Well, and it's just not the Catholics, of course, because we think about this as well. And with catechesis or catechism, we're talking about the doctrines that you're handing down and how you're teaching those to the next generation and those who are coming to faith, and that they would understand. One of the things that we find, and this might be of interest to you, Andrew, at our church, for example, we do something called Questioning Christianity, where we open an opportunity for anybody who would like to come and ask whatever questions that they want. And I am continually fascinated. We've been doing this for 3 years. We do it twice a year, in 3 years. How many people are just coming to church because, for various reasons, and especially right now, we've been seeing a lot of people just coming to church. Maybe it's because Jordan Peterson told them they need to go to church.
Yeah.
We know of a couple of those, But for various reasons, they're coming into church, but they know nothing. And it raises these profound questions of, first of all, we can often make the assumption that, if you're coming to church, that you are a Christian, which isn't necessarily the case.
That's right. And
then secondly, how are we reaching out to them that they could become Christian, and then teaching them what Christianity actually believes?
Well, you've raised a number of really important questions. The first is, I think in our society, a lot of people amongst our secularly minded fellow citizens think they know what Christianity is. And that leads to a lot of ignorance and a lot of anti-Christian bias, we find. But I think we have often overestimated what people in the pews actually know about their faith. And so this really demands a lot of, I think, thinking, reflecting on how have we taught the faith, how we've presented the faith. Have we presented the faith directly in all of its power and all of its beauty, the depth of the tradition? Because I think a lot of people, especially young people, are encountering the Christian faith maybe for the first time. Even if they were raised in a Christian tradition, now they're realizing, this is actually something quite profound. And they realize that what the secular world is offering them, whether it's in the universities or in their social circles, is really pretty thin gruel.
We should talk about this a little bit deeper, because in the survey, what you found was that the young people actually were more committed to the doctrine.
Yes, more orthodox.
More orthodox.
Yeah.
Even a sexual ethics was more.
And sometimes by more than 10 or 12% compared to their grandparents and their parents. And this reflects what we've seen in previous surveys, that the 18 to 34 age group is more non-religious than the general population, so upwards of 25%. But they're also more religious than often their parents and grandparents. So about 20% of them are religiously committed. And this is really fascinating, because when you and I were growing up, we were both, churchy kids growing up, but I think many in our generation, you didn't really talk about your faith. We talked about this just a few minutes ago. You sort of privatized your faith, what you did in the comfortable pew. And there was maybe a bit more cultural pressure or societal pressure to be in church. That's what you did. Mm-hmm. And that led to a lot of cultural Catholics and cultural Protestants and so forth. But there's none of that anymore. There's no pressure to be in the church. In fact, social pressure is to keep you out of the church.
Right.
And these young people are there because they, I think, have found that what they've been told and what a lot of progressive ideology is offering them is very, very thin. And they are coming to recognize this. And I think at the heart of it is they're being told consistently, it's all about you. It's all about you. And it's this hyper-individualism. And then they come into the church and they realize it's actually not about you at all. Mm-hmm. It's about Jesus Christ and the relationship you are called to have with him. But he's first. Others are second. You're third. And I think what a lot of young people are finding, especially young men, is that this is very freeing. And it frees them in a really counterintuitive way, because it binds them. So you are freed by being bound. Yeah. Because you're going to say, okay, I'm going to just be in this box. So I'm going to be a committed Catholic, and that means I accept these things, I don't accept these things. And so the world would say, well, that's limiting your freedom, because the world thinks that the goal of freedom is to be free, which of course is nonsense.
Right.
The Christian says, no, the goal of freedom is to pursue what is good and true and beautiful, and that means Jesus Christ, because he's the fullness of truth.
Right.
And so I think, especially young men, maybe under the influence of Jordan Peterson, or just, frankly, the influence of the gospel and holy tradition, they find that they enter into something, and it's bigger than them, and they want to go very deep.
And the thing that I've been seeing is it's identity.
Yeah.
In hyper-individualism, it is a worldview without an identity. When you are the identity, when you're your own God, if you will, it's what Nietzsche, it's really this Nietzschean idea of you're foundationless. You're just adrift in the universe, and you're grasping for something that you can try to make an identity out of, but it never satisfies. It never works. And that's where I've often seen this idea, like you're saying, it's kind of counterintuitive that when you're now finding an identity within a set of beliefs, and that it's not you, it's actually Jesus, that it has this way of anchoring you.
That's right.
That you can't do for yourself.
Well, and the radical individualism that is on offer these days ends up in profound loneliness.
Yes.
Because, you're an individual, not a person anymore. And to be a human person is dependent upon community, real community, not social media community. That is, okay, it's a community of a type, I suppose, but it leaves you empty because you need interaction with other people, and to be in a community with people that are bound by the same goal, and in this case, to become a saint.
Yeah.
And you can't do that on your own. And as great as a lot of different, maybe communities that people are part of are, only in the church can you come to know who I truly am. And I know myself through the lens of Christ, and he shows me who I am. And that, as I said before, I think it does free us. Yeah. And it frees people. In our parish in Ottawa, historically we had about 250 families. The fastest growing constituency right now for us are displaced Ukrainians coming from the war.
Yeah.
So probably, I would guess we probably have increased our size by about 100 families. The second fastest growing constituency, young men between the ages of 20 and 35. Every Sunday, there's a new guy showing up who's been brought by maybe some of his friends who are attending our church. And they're just amazed. They're amazed at the beauty of the Byzantine liturgy, this otherworldly beauty that they encounter. And then they encounter other parts of the tradition, the depth of the patristic tradition, the depths of Eastern Christian spirituality, the power of the gospel, and what that calls us to, the Jesus prayer and so forth. And they want it all.
This one, by the way, one of the things I've always loved about apologetics is that you see this robust tradition that's been a part of the church and I don't mean, with regards to apologetics, I'm just talking broadly here about thinking deeply about life's big issues, and that this has been something that we've done for a long time and have cared about. And it kind of, and maybe this is a good place for us to land this conversation is, how do we get back to that kind of Christianity that's grounded in history, and grounded in tradition, and grounded theologically? Because I think about this with regards to the evangelical, tradition that I'm a part of. Is we for example, Andrew, stopped doing Sunday school some time ago. Yeah. And I remember when churches stopped doing Sunday school, and the question was, what's going to be the cost? And I think that we're starting to see the cost. Yeah. Where churches, and I'm not saying you have to bring back Sunday school, but what you have to think through is, how are we catechizing? Like how are we teaching? How are we helping people to understand the doctrines that make us Christian? Yeah. And that we hold to, that we believe those closed-handed issues. Now, I think obviously from the survey, evangelicals seem to be doing better at this, or it could be that there's just more that identify nominally as Catholic or Roman Catholic.
I think that's the issue more.
But that also could be an opportunity.
It's a huge opportunity. And as I was mentioning before we were on camera, I was spending the weekend with the Benedictine community in Mission, BC at Westminster Abbey, and I'm very close to this community. And I gave them a talk about this survey that we'd done. And, they said, okay, yeah, this is depressing, especially from a Catholic perspective, but such opportunities. And so how do we seize the opportunities? And again, to quote His Eminence Cardinal Collins, who was at our launch event, he said, we must preach the fullness of the faith in all of its beauty. Don't soft pedal it.
Yeah.
And I remember the advice of a priest who I'm very close to, when I asked him to give me some helpful, criticism on my preaching. He said to me, Father Deacon Andrew, give it to them straight. They can take it. Don't hold back. The tradition that we have is not some dead thing that people practiced 100 years ago. It's a living tradition.
Yeah.
And at the core of a living tradition is the Holy Spirit. And so if we want to engage in what we as Catholics refer to as the new evangelization, we have to preach the fullness of the faith and be guided by the Holy Spirit in doing so, and dig deep into the tradition. The worst thing you can call someone in the Byzantine rite is an innovator. Innovation is very bad because it implies that you're trying to do something outside of the tradition. Yeah. When in fact what you need to do is dig deep into the tradition and present it anew to every generation and let them discover it and see the presence of God in it, and how generation after generation after generation of people who have been struggling to become saints have lived that tradition, and that's what they're called to. And we have a group that I lead at our parish. It's the young adults group, and I call it Saints. Mm-hmm. And it's the name and the goal. Yeah. And the goal is to learn about how do we become saints. That through that process of sanctification, or as we say in the Greek East, theosis, where we're called to become like God. St. Athanasius talks about this on the Incarnation, his great text on the Incarnation. That's the goal. And so we have to be equipping people with that as clergy and as pastors and people that are involved in apologetical work. Can they give an account for the faith that is within them?
Right.
And that has to be our goal.
Absolutely. You know what? It was great chatting with you. I could go down 100 different rabbit trails of important stuff that we were talking about today. I hope that this encourages you listeners and those of us that do call ourselves Christians and asking those deeper questions of what does that mean? What do I actually believe in? Just how deep are my roots in the faith? The church that I attend, the purpose statement of the church is to develop deeply rooted disciples of Christ. And when I was reading through this, I was thinking to myself, right now in Canada, that's exactly what we need.
Absolutely. And we can do it.
And we can.
The Holy Spirit is guiding us and our Lord is with us. And so we shouldn't fear anything.
And we need as many tools as we can as we're doing that. That's why I'm thankful for the work that Apologetics Canada is doing in this effort. And I'm thankful for the work that Cardus is doing. Where could people go to find out more about Cardus?
So it's a very easy website, Cardus, C-A-R-D, as in David, U-S.ca, cardus.ca. And you can find all of our research reports there, all of our policy work that we've done. And you can subscribe to a raft of newsletters. And we've just launched, I'll put in a little plug.
Please do.
A newsletter for Christian pastors and leaders. We just launched it a couple weeks ago. It's called Times Like These. And we have pastors very much in mind. So it's light on text. So as a pastor, you're busy. You can get through this newsletter in no more than 10 minutes.
And
not even.
And I'm a part of that newsletter. That's actually how I found out about this study.
Yeah. So lots of video content talking about our research, reflections, and then I've got a little section called the Deacon's Dispatch, where I try to do a little 250-word nugget of hopefully some truth.
That's great. And if you're ever in Ottawa for like the prayer breakfast or something like that, I would encourage you to check out Cardus while you're there. Andrew, thank you again, man, for
Thanks,
coming.
Andy.
Yeah, always good to be with you.
Yeah, God bless you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for joining us for the AC podcast. We'll be back next week with more things to think about. Until then, love God, love people. Bye for now.